Hello everyone, this is FideMaster Viktor Neustroyev. We are about to start our weekly webinar in 5 minutes. So today the topic is how to play without a minor piece. Well, maybe this is not the best title to reveal the main concept, but I'm going to talk about what you should do in order to save the game when you are down some material. For example, a minor piece. Okay, so people are joining. So for today, I prepared 5 games. One game played by my student. Another game is the game that I played. There is also 3 games played by top grandmasters, including Garry Kasparov and Alexander Grishchuk. Okay, so we are waiting for more people to come, and we will start in 4 minutes. So today I expect actually more people to join the event because we had a kind of promotion on the TheChessWorld.com website, and some people from there are likely to join. This event is recorded as well as this event is recorded as well as it's streaming on the Chess World YouTube channel and on Chessland's website. As usual, guys, if your microphones work really well, you can, I mean, with no background noise, you can suggest your answers or ask any questions by your voice. If anything, if you don't have a microphone or you just want to type in the chat, so you're welcome. You can type your answer or your questions in the chat. Okay. So just a few minutes left before we start. So I'm going to share some general ideas of what you should be doing when you are down a piece, um, and what you shouldn't be doing, of course, and then illustrate it with real examples. Okay, so people are joining, but I think more will enter the conference in 5 minutes. Okay, guys, so you can also let me know where you joined this meeting from, which country or which town. And I also would like to know about your ratings, about your chess experience and your, if you have any titles. Also, it would be nice if you share them. So, for example, if you play in the United States, what's your USCF rating? If you don't know me, then my rating is right now it's 2285. This is FIDE rating. So my maximum rating was 23 and 5. And because of reaching 2300, I was able to get the FIDE master title. However, then I decreased this rating a little, and now I increased it by playing here in Argentina in the national league. Our team, well, it wasn't the best team, but it because of mainly because of me, the team got the 6th place. I think without me, the team would be maybe in the 9th or the 10th. Anyway, well, there are a lot of strong chess players here in Argentina. So during this tournament, I was playing against two grandmasters and one international master who was 2400. So this is the only game I lost to that international master who was 24. So I lost to him. However, I was able to defeat one grandmaster, and I drew the game with another 25 plus 100 grandmaster here. Anyway, okay, so it seems that it's already 11 a.m. and let's start. Okay, so people are joining. Okay, so we can see my student Brian is joining us, and the first game that we are going to talk about is actually Brian's game. This is a really good example of how club players play and what a club player should do once he somehow loses a piece. Okay, so let me share the screen. Okay, I think you can see my the board as well as my face. So please let me know whether the quality of video and audio is good. I think it is actually. And we are about to start. So I'm going to share some. Okay, perfect. So we are going to start with some basics. So first of all, everyone understands that sometimes we do blunder, sometimes we do miscalculate, and as the result, we may end up playing without a minor piece or being down a minor piece. So, or sometimes we sacrifice a minor piece. If we do sacrifice a minor piece, then there should be a compensation. What form of a compensation it should be? Well, it can be several pawns to compensate, let's say, the bishop or the knight. It can be some initiative that we may develop and force our opponent to defend and maybe provoke him to make a mistake later in the game. It also can be an attack on the enemy king. And in my opinion, the attack on the enemy king is the best way to have a compensation. Also, if you have an attack, there is a chance that there can be that another sacrifice of your material may be required. Okay, so okay, so let's say you blunder it a piece and you or maybe you just miscalculate it and you end up being down the material. What you should do in this case? Well, in this case, if you see that there is no direct attack and enough compensation, you should play for a draw. How? You should try to exchange pawns or restrict some enemy pieces. For example, if you lost the bishop, then you can, and you have a few pawns as a compensation, you can set up your pawns on the squares of this bishop to limit him. What else you can do? If it's the end game, then you may centralize the king because while in the end game there is just a very little chance of the king being checkmated, so the king should play as an ordinary piece, and maybe because of your piece's activities you will obtain this compensation. And of course the key idea is to minimize the number of pawns on the board if it is an end game, because let's say your opponent has two minor pieces, two knights, for example, you have a bishop and they have only one pawn. You just need to sacrifice the bishop for that pawn, and your opponent will be playing with two knights. And with two knights, it's impossible to checkmate, of course, if you play properly. So when you are down a piece, you shouldn't exchange pieces, but instead you should make the position more complicated. So by saying exchange pieces, I mean minor and major pieces. Exchanging pawns is fine. However, you should make the position more complicated and try to provoke your opponent to make a mistake. Ideally, you'd better initiate the attack. Okay, let's start. I'll show you what happened in this game. So Brian was playing with white pieces, English opening, but then he played d4, so it transposed to King's Indian defense, knight c3, quite natural. Then his opponent plays a weird move, knight h5, bishop goes to e2, e6, so it was definitely a mistake, letting white capture on h5. And then, well, here black decided that they need the queen. Well, I would keep developing my pieces like that, but Brian plays knight e4 to gain a temper. Well, why not? It's a possible move. Queen goes to g6. So the pawns are separated, and here Brian plays a nice move, queen g5. Well, maybe it was better just to bring the knight to g3, but queen g5 also makes sense. The idea is that if queen takes e4, queen takes g7 with an attack of this rook, and this pawn is vulnerable, will be vulnerable later in the game. And if queen takes, knight takes g5, these pawns are still separated, which is good. However, after castling, so here, let me show you. So the bishop is hanging, but after castling, black is already threatening to take on e4, because this bishop is protected with the king this time. So Brian unfortunately completely forgot about his knight being hanging. So it could make sense to either protect the knight or exchange here and then keep developing pieces, for example, or just move the queen back to h4. So there were a lot of options, but he plays knight f3, completely forgetting that the knight is hanging and there is no option to capture on g7. So we got into the position where white made a critical mistake. White miscalculated, and now white is down a piece. So I am waiting for your suggestions, what you guys would continue in this position. There is no concrete move that provides you with a way of gaining a piece back, but the game is not over, especially if we understand that that was a blitz game, and we see that white pieces are better developed, white has some center control. Well, we cannot say that this bishop is bad, but maybe there is something that we may do in order to gain a piece back at least. What your ideas are, so please share your thoughts. Okay, so let me open the chat. Okay, so there is a good post. There is a good comment from John. Um, Okay, any other suggestions? What do you think? Or maybe just some general ideas. Guys, if you have your microphone working, you can just unmute yourself and say something. Okay, so Muhammad suggests queen to h5 and then knight g5. Well, okay, you play these moves, but you are actually not attacking h7 because of the queen here. You're attacking the queen, but the queen simply goes here, here, or here. I think to g6 to provoke an exchange of the queens um, and simplify the position. So black, being up a piece, wants to simplify the position. White, being a piece down, wants to complicate the position. Here, white realizes that they have already two pieces into the attack. There is a pin. The king doesn't have the g pawn, so potentially the king is vulnerable. And because of that, white wants to take advantage of it. So white plays exactly what John mentioned, h4. So with the idea of this, as well as this, well, not sure about d5. Well, if the bishop is here, then d5 works. But you see, if you play bishop d2, bishop c3, you spend so many tempi, and 2 tempi are spent, right? And he just plays d5 and defends everything with just one move. So doing bishop c3, bishop d2, bishop c3, and d5 with white pieces doesn't make much sense if your opponent plays properly. Okay. So h4 was played. What white should do, or what black should do? Because white is about to do this, so also bring the rook, maybe h5 and bring the rook with a temper. And white definitely doesn't want to exchange the queens. However, black should exchange the queens. That's why making this move would make sense. So let's say queen g6. White doesn't want to exchange. If they exchange, there is no compensation. So the queen goes to f4. Now g2 can be captured, but then this move. c7 is hanging. Maybe it's not so important, but we don't want to lose this pawn. So d6, h5. Taking here is a blunder because of rook g1 and then h6. So maybe queen h6. Queen goes to g4 or g3. Well, if the queen goes to g4, it's e5 with a temper. So queen goes there. And the plan is to do this or to do this. Well, and so e4 is coming. Yeah, it seems to be quite dangerous. So probably f5. And if e4 is played this time, then it's f4. However, if rook h4 is played, the position becomes more complicated. So what would I recommend? For what would I recommend for white and for black in this position is just probably king h8 and after e4 moving the queen back. But then there is a problem that h6 is always a problem once it's defended enough. So for example, h6, bishop h6, bishop takes h6, it was just a blunder. Okay, so you see, actually this scenario with queen g6 may not work immediately. So what else can we do in this position? Well, maybe doing h6 is a good idea. We chase the queen away. The queen goes here because white doesn't want to exchange the queens. And then we should speed up the black piece's development in order to defend against this attack and then try to simplify the position after that. So maybe knight c6, maybe this move. So h5, and then we may continue with, I don't know actually. e5, rook h4 is still a problem. Okay. So maybe h6 is too slow. Maybe we can do f6 this time. f6, queen g3, and maybe f5 in order to play this move. Yeah, that makes more sense. So they play this, threatening with h6. Ah, okay, it still doesn't work. Well, okay, so let's just play knight c6. h5, h6. Queen goes there. And this is where I think that we don't need to save this pawn. We'd better focus on something else because rook h4, rook g4 is coming. So I would say f5. And if rook h4, we simply move the queen here. They may take on c7 and obtain some compensation, but actually it's not enough because this king is also in a danger and black may initiate a counterattack with something like that. So this is the strategy that black should initiate. They should try to exchange the queens, force the enemy queen to go to this position, to g3, and when this happens, black should prepare their king by doing this move and defend against rook g4, and then try to either initiate a counterplay or just exchange pieces. In the game, they played king h8, which does make sense. The game continued with this move. Here, h6 is a must, but f6 was played instead. Queen goes to g3. Now rook g8. Right? That's a logical move to defend here, but actually it is a mistake. How would you continue with white in this position? Yeah, so John is absolutely correct. So we should start with rook h4 gaining the tempo. The queen moves where to? Well, not here because of c4, or e4, sorry. So probably somewhere there. Then rook g4 and you are threatening with h6. Maybe they have to play h6 themselves, but then it's... This makes sense, but I think e4 is better. And we are threatening to take and then to capture on g8. If king h7 this time, I still think that we can capture. And if king captures, it's this. So if king takes, queen g4 is a mate. If king goes there, then with h6, we open the h file and try to checkmate the king. Aha, except that I blunder it here. Okay, sorry. No, it doesn't work. So probably d5 first, and then this strategy with rook g6 and bishop h6. Okay. So rook h4 is definitely the strongest move, but Brian plays this, which is logical because knight g6, h takes g6, h takes g6, and the king is almost checkmated. What they should play? Bishop h6. So why? To prepare for this move. Now, if knight g6, it's simply h takes g6, h takes g6, and rook takes g6, or maybe queen takes g6. This is protected. So maybe the game would continue with something like that. I think actually rook g6 is better here. Rook g6, king g7, and it looks like black saved their king's position. In the game, it was bishop f8. This move is worse because this time knight g6 is really dangerous. Well, so here, what black can do? For some reason, black decided to take, and this is just a terrible mistake because the rook joins the attack. Instead, they'd better take with the rook, then h takes g6, and then they play h6 to keep the king's position closed. All they need is to bring these pieces. So, but h takes g6, h takes g6 check. So moving the bishop would allow white, well, would help. Then king g7. Then f3, chasing the queen away. Queen goes there. And after queen h4, it's still a losing position because of all this stuff. But they played even worse. They played king g7 and got this nice checkmate. So what we can realize by after we analyze this game, we can take a look that we can see that black absolutely neglected the threats that white created here. And white did the right things, maybe not with the best moves, but definitely right things. White wanted to initiate the attack on the king, and this is how this extra knight that black has doesn't count. And instead of doing these moves, like king h8, rook g8, black would better secure their king and develop their pieces quickly. So these pieces are not joining the game. The knight is also not playing in this game. That's why actually black doesn't have a chance to take advantage of extra knight or extra bishop in this position. And it seems that at least temporarily, the position is materially equal, which means that white should should keep developing their initiative, because this will not let black get all their pieces into the game and take advantage of their extra minor piece. So try to make the position complicated, try to provoke your opponent to make a mistake, and ideally initiate the attack on the enemy king, of course, if it is possible. Sometimes it is not, and this is what our second game is about. Okay, any questions regarding the first game that we analyzed today? Okay, it seems to me not everyone got the link. Okay, how can I find it? Okay, so an error joins us. Oops, no.
Victor, you're looking for the link you sent to me. It's Lisa, by the way.
Uh-huh.
Okay, let me send it to you.
No, I think I have the link. I have the link of this meeting. So I just so wanna send it to one of our permanent I mean permanent participants, but for some reason he wasn't able to join. It's interesting because I think he is quite familiar with it. Okay, by the way, guys, this link is permanent, and you don't need to register for the next event next weekend. So if you register, it will be fine. You will get the emails with the link. But if you are enough experienced, you can just click to the same link that I've already sent. So to the link of this meeting, because this is a repeating event. So I called it a weekly webinar. So you just click the same link next Sunday and you will join this meeting, and we are gonna talk about the next topic. So let me tell you about this game. I played I played in Budapest, and I wanted to increase my rating and also probably to fight for an international master norm. Well, going forward, I can say that I didn't get an international master norm. I needed a half of a point more. And that was, I think, the second or the third round. The second, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, the second round. So in the first round, I lost. It was a 6 hours game. I was winning all the game, but then being low on time, I blundered it. And unfortunately lost. But I could easily make a draw several times. So maybe if I drew in the first round, I would score an international master norm, but unfortunately it didn't happen. So this is the game against the guy who was already a FIDE master. He was 2297. So he was from the United States. And this guy finally got the first place. He won that tournament. I got the second place. We scored, I think he scored a half of a point more. But he lost that game to me. Okay. So he didn't blunder, of course, but he made a very suspicious sacrifice. Let me explain. So here I play Slav defense, then after e3 I have e6, of course, but this time I decided to play bishop f5 because I thought that he is quite a strong player, so I'd better play something more simple. Knight c3, e6. So now I have a very solid position. Even if he exchanges his knight for the bishop, I'm completely fine. So he plays this, Well, bishop f4, I think, is a better move. f3, bishop g6, but I played bishop g6 right away. This move is also possible. Knight g6, h takes g6, bishop d3, knight b d7, castle, bishop d6. So I have an attack on h2, he plays h3, queen e7, and in such positions, I usually take here and play e5. But he plays e4 first. D takes e4, bishop takes e4, which really surprised me. Okay, I decided, okay, so I can take it, but then he takes, and then maybe he somehow develops the attack, maybe with bishop g5. So I just decided to move my bishop here in advance. He played queen f3. Okay, I thought that, well, it looks like I can successfully play e5. And e5 was actually a bit of an accuracy. Instead, I'd better castle to this or that side. But I played e5 because I thought that once he brings the rook to e1, I can successfully castle and there are no problems at all. So I played e5, and can you guess the next move of white? It was really something that surprised me. Of course, I did see this option. It wasn't a blunder, but I thought that this option doesn't require much attention because it's simply a blunder. However, my opponent decided that this is a very nice move, and he has a very strong attack after that. So guess the move for white here. Okay, so d5 to shut down the trades, I think, was a very logical idea. But no, this move wasn't played in the game. However, d5 was definitely the best move. I don't remember what I prepared for d5. I think it was c takes d5. No. Knight e4, then he takes here. Yeah, I think it was something like knight e4. Knight e4, and then I'm gonna take on d5. So if d5 was played, then he probably needs to take. I take here. Then well, this is a blunder. So he takes here with a check. I take with my queen. He takes with the queen on c3. No, of course, if he loses on, if he takes on b7, there is intermediate check, after which I can successfully save my rook by castling, and I'm a piece up. But he should take on c3, and then I castle, and this is what I thought that my position is okay. The only thing I need is to get my bishop to d4, well, which is possible, but if he stops it, I still think that this position is approximately equal. So d5 was the best way. No, knight d5 is a complete blunder. So he played bishop c6, which was a blunder. He probably miscalculated something. I don't know what he was talking about, but when he played this move, of course, I spent maybe 10 or 15 minutes more, or even 20 minutes to make sure that I'm not blundering anything, because this position was quite unfamiliar to me. So I think, well, I've already played this position, but bishop d3, knight b d7, so this and queen f3 was very uncommon move, which is a bit of an accuracy, but bishop c6, I just completely misunderstand what he is going to do. If it was a blitz game, maybe it could make sense to initiate this sacrifice, but okay, so pawn takes, queen takes. Here the point is that he is attacking two pieces simultaneously, and he is about to increase the pressure with knight b5 by doing knight d6, knight takes c7. So what do you think? Well, in this position, definitely, well, no, this is not an option because of the pin. So definitely my only move is just rook c8. There is nothing else I can do. But what can I do after knight b5? What do you have in mind? Castle. Okay, John suggests castle. And if I then castle, king, if they take on c7 after that. So castle, knight takes c7. Knight b6. D takes e5. Oh, no, 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 no. For knight b6, okay. Yeah, knight b6 actually works too. Okay, Brian suggests king d8. Well, king d8, I think this is what my opponent wanted me to play. Because after king d8, he has a very strong attack. I think he had this in mind and then something like this. No, if knight takes its rook d1, I don't like it. So queen takes, then take here, and then maybe in this position with the king in the center, he was looking for a long-term attack. So after knight b5, I actually castled. Knight takes c7. Well, here you guys suggest knight b6 move. So the knight is hanging. Well, I think you're right, actually. This move makes sense. And then queen e5, queen takes, and then queen c7 anyway. Or rook c7. So, for example, c5, you take f4, but I have a check, and after which the queen is hanging. Right, knight b6 worked. So actually, anything worked. Knight b6 wasn't the best way here. The move I played was better, but I made this move too quickly. I didn't look for other options. I played knight b8. Why? Because it's a double attack. Two of his pieces are hanging now. Maybe this guy wanted to play this move and unpin, but after knight takes c6, I'm protecting the knight on the 7th, so I'm completely fine. This is what happened in the game. Of course, that wasn't the best move. The best move, and if I spent more time, I would definitely find it. It was queen d8. This is the pin, so he has to move the queen maybe. Then I take on c7, he takes here. I take on d6, and then I take on c4, and this pawn is a weakness. I have a knight for 2 pawns, and I should be winning. I think it's an easy win, actually. I played this move, so knight d5. Because if he moves the queen, he loses here. So knight d5, I take, he takes, and then he takes the pawn on d5. Well, and let's take a look at this position. So, well, this and these pawns are hanging. What do you think? Which one to save? Okay, so b3 to save the pawn on c4. Yeah, because the c is the pass pawn. Yeah, but maybe he needs to play this move first. And then after I take, at least it ruins my pawn structure. I think that he didn't like that my rooks are active enough in that case. And maybe with the pawn on e4, I can occupy d4. I mean, with the pawn on e5. So that's why he played b3 right away. Knight takes a5 and bishop a3. So this guy miscalculated somewhere. I don't know why he decided to play bishop c6. We didn't talk about bishop c6 in the game. We did talk about the endgame that we finally had. And, well, you see, there is no way to initiate the attack on the king. However, he has 2 pawns as a compensation, but 2 pawns are not enough to compensate the knight. That's why this guy is actually creating threats. With almost all of his moves, he was creating a threat. And here, his main hope is past pawns on the c4 and b3. So if he tries to advance them to the 6th and the 5th rank, maybe he gets a compensation, a full compensation, I mean. So this is hanging. I have to play this move. If he plays this move, I don't care. I have knight c6. So he plays rook ad1. He wants to control the file. He wants to enter d7 and detect my other weakness. So I think I made a kind of a mistake. It could make sense for me to play this move to stop f4, but I played knight f5. Rook f1. What am I trying to do in this position? I want to simplify. So all exchanges favors me. If, for example, we get such a position without rooks, I would say I'm completely winning. My only task is to bring the king to d7, and then I can attack his pawns with my knights. Ideally, I would love to exchange all minor pieces too, but it's a bit complicated. So knight c6, a rook pair is exchanged. Now I want to enter his camp. So king f1. And what do you think I should do in this position? Knight fd4. Okay, what's the point of this move? What if this guy continues with bishop c5, which is a kind of a double attack? Okay, knight fd4. Well, bishop c5, a6 cannot be played because you... Oh, you don't blunder. So bishop c5, a6. If he takes on d4, we have rook d8. Interesting, I didn't realize it. Yeah, but how to play then? I think we should bring the king, I mean. So a6 does make sense, knight fd4 too. However, I think I played a better move. I played a5 because I see that this guy is about to do this stuff. b4, c5, b5, and try to promote. a4 stops b4, and doing c5 pawn advance right away doesn't make any sense. I have a successful a successful blocker. If he even somehow tries to attack it, which is impossible, then at least having the knight on d4 may allow me to stop it. I would also consider rook e6, which would provoke an exchange of the rooks. So bishop c5, f6, g4, knight f2 e7. So this is where it seems to me that he was overtaking the initiative. Well, actually, he did have an initiative here, but after g4, I realized that this is the only thing I can do. Knight f e7, where else? So maybe instead of doing a5, moving the knight on d4 wasn't a bad idea. Or in this position, instead of f6, I'd better find something else. But okay. So he plays a3. And
Why not
this
rook
is...
d8? Sorry.
Why not rook d8? In which case?
Uh, go back a
Here?
couple moves. No, one more. Before he plays
Instead of
g,
f6?
yeah. Yeah.
Rook d8 in this position.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, I think this, it doesn't
Or
work.
before he got to bishop c5. Before he went to bishop c5, I think you had it the option.
Rook d8 right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was something I didn't like it. Maybe it was something like take, and then before.
Okay.
Then it's a bit dangerous. If he advances these pawns further, I can get in trouble. I actually think that he takes. Okay, let me show you. Take, then this, a5, or maybe a6. Well, if a5, he does a3 this, and if a6, he does b4 right away. So, well, rook d8 deserved attention. Maybe it deserved attention even here. But then I think he could just play king move. Maybe knight d4 in this position. Okay, so yeah, rook d8 was definitely what I had in mind, but I decided to bring the king. g4 and knight e7. So in this position, yeah, okay. And then I should play g5, which, well, a3 he wants before. So this is where I should play g5. And then I can get my knight to g6, e5. So this would keep my position solid. So for example, b4. I don't think that I should take. I think I'd better play this move.
Or maybe 95,
95 right away, but what if he takes there?
1964.
A6. Because I'm not 100% sure how to take this pawn. So I think knight g6 is a good idea. So if he does b5 move, which does make sense, then the knight goes there, and then I want to do this. Because b6 this time doesn't make much sense. Just this. And the pawn is a weakness. So he does this move, I do this. b7, but the pawn is on a light square, so he can only defend it with this move. And then, of course, he has this, but I can simply stop it.
92.
Yeah, with knight d2. Well, yeah, knight d2, knight c6 was another option. Knight c6 and the other knight to e5 was good enough, but of course, knight d2 here. So that was the best way to play, but I decided that I instead bring the king. So, and the problem was that, you see, the position was complicated enough, so I made a mistake allowing him to get his pawn to f4, and that f4 pawn move restricted my knights. I cannot get to e5 anymore, but I needed this square to better operate with my pieces. So f4, rook d8 was played. And then he needs to exchange, because if he doesn't exchange, I enter his camp.
Instead of rook d8, how about rook b8?
Yeah, there was something wrong with this move. Okay, don't remember what exactly, but let me find it. Rook d3.
G5.
Hmm. No, g5. Well, in this case, g5 doesn't look so good because I end up with fewer pawns.
Instead of fg, knight 94.
You mean in this position?
In this position. Knight c6.
Which of them?
Oh,
This?
yeah, 97.
Well, then he takes here.
Yeah, gf.
Well, but you see, there are only 2 pawns. If he
Yeah.
exchanges his 5 for my 2, it is a draw. Rook and the knight do not win against the rook. So I shouldn't exchange pawns here. I mean, I can do the exchange of these pawns, but I definitely should leave enough pawns to promote them. So that's why I try to simplify. He takes. Well, what else he can do? The problem is that I enter his camp if he does something else. Maybe king e2 was a better idea, but he decided to exchange because it forced my knight to go to a passive position. So b4. So I was ready for that, and this is where I played this move. And this was a really clever move because it provoked me to, it provoked him to exchange. Because if he moves his bishop somewhere else, for example here, how do I play? A takes b5, then bring the king. No, I don't think I need a takes b5. I'd better bring the king right away. Because if... he can take with the pawn. Okay. Maybe actually I'd better start with... Okay, yeah, maybe take, and then bring the king. Or maybe a4 and then bring the king. So interesting. Oh, what does the engine say about this move? Okay, yeah, a takes b4, and then this move. And after c5, knight c4. Yeah, I think this is what I had in mind. Because if he does bishop c7 move, I have knight d5. Yes, this is what I had in mind, definitely. Not king e6, but... a takes b4, then knight d6, I'm attacking this pawn, so c5 is a must, but then knight c4, and I'm about to exchange. And if I take here, I definitely stop these two double pawns. At least my king is closer, but I always has knight c6, knight b8. So he has to play with the bishop this time. Well, if he does c7, then knight d5 is a double attack. If he does this move, then knight c6 is a double attack. So I gain another pawn, which provides me with a winning position. So that's why he decided to exchange, which was a clever idea. King e7, king e2, and then I should win. So what is the key concept? He may draw the game in case of what? In case if he advances his pawns to the 5th rank, for example, these two at least. Or maybe he exchanges these, my pawns, leaving me with almost no pawns or fewer pawns, for example. And my task was actually to provoke one of his pawns to move to be able to blockade the rest. So if he goes to c5, then my king should be on d5 or on c6, and my knight should be here or here. Something like, ideally, he would better play b5, then I can settle my knight on c5, which will stop all of his pawns. So king d6, bringing the king closer. King d3. This is where I think I made a mistake. But in my opinion, at that moment, this move was quite clever. So I played a4, which equalized the position. Now he has a chance to draw the game, but this is a very complicated idea, and he definitely didn't notice it during the game. None of us was in a time trouble. I was, but later. So, king d3, what should I do? Well, if I play a4, for example, like I did in the game, can you tell me what white should do in order to try to draw the game? What is their plan? c5, well, c5, king d5. King c3, then b5. Actually, this is what I expected him to play, but no, it doesn't work. So, for example, if he does this move, I was about to play king c6, if I'm not mistaken. And if he plays c5, then king d5 works. If he plays this move, then my king goes to c5. And then I simply capture his pawns, one by one. The key idea is that the knight on c4 stops b6, pawn move 2. So king c3, this is what I expected. He played king d4, which was a mistake because he lost his last chance, but he could draw the game if he played this move. What is the concept? So first of all, it will be a Zugzwang. For example, if I do this c5, then I have to play this move, and then it's really hard to hold the position. He has these ideas, b5 ideas. He may not need to play b5 right away. So doing this, knight c6 and king c4, and then b5 in future. If I try to do my original plan, which is to relocate the knight here, then c5, king c6, and here he can draw the game in case if he tries to exchange. He cannot exchange all of my pawns, but there is a very nice idea. I'm going to illustrate it. So f5, take, the king takes, he wants to enter, and the knight is hanging at the moment. So knight f8 stops king g6 and king e6, of course, but h5, king d5, and g5. So he exchanges this pawn, and it's actually a Zugzwang. If I move the knight, he comes closer. If he takes this pawn, he will be able to promote the h pawn. So I have no option to go there because then he does this. And if my knight stops the c pawn, then he takes on g7 and he keeps his h5 pawn alive. That is the main problem. For example, king c6, king f5, it stops knight e6. King d5, just a repetition. Knight goes to d7, it's this, and I lose a pawn. So something like knight, wait, where we are? King f5. Okay, something like knight e6. Wait a sec, in this position, knight e6. He goes there, and then he threatens with this move. And then again, it seems like a Zugzwang. I have to move my knight. And if I move my knight, he goes to g6, attacking this pawn. So that was the best way for him to get a draw. But neither me nor him found it. So that's why he did this move. And the difference is that this time I bring my knight to e6, and he has no time to enter my camp. So for example, king e4, knight goes there, and after this move, I have knight g5. He played h4. The idea to exchange is correct, but this position is already losing. Knight c6, king c3, and f5. So f5, I'm trying to block the pawns to not let him enter my camp. Well, he could play g5, but that would make this f4 pawn vulnerable, and my winning plan is just to do this. Let's say g5. Let me show you. So g5, I would continue with with something like that. He defends, but he is in his Zugzwang. Because if he what can he do? If he pushes the pawns, I'm fine. I go there and I can chase his king away. And if he just keeps his king on f3 defending here, then I enter his camp like that. Take on a3 and so on. Okay. So g takes f5 happened. G takes f5, b5. knight goes to d8, but this time this knight is able to block everything with knight c5. So king b4. Well, he takes this pawn, but it's already over. Knight e6, king a4, knight f4, and this pawn will be promoted first because I have my king here. So, for example, if he does this move, I simply play king c5, and then if he plays this move, I can stop it with king c6, king a6, then this move, and knight c5. This is the key idea. And then my f pawn will be promoted. So king b4, knight goes to d3, and then my knight finally reaches c5. So now his king, well, I can stop all 3 pawns with the knight, and his king has to stop my f pawn. I don't need to move this knight. I can play king e5 right away, but I played this, king e3, king e5, and you see, if he pushes, I take it. So this is how I just simply capture the h4 pawn, because if these pawns move, I take one of them. So he played b6, I took on b6, c5, and this is where I just played this move. So the c pawn cannot be promoted, the a7 cannot be promoted neither. I can just gain tempi by moving my knight to a7 and c8 back. So he played a few more moves, and then he realized that he is in the Zugzwang, he has to move the king, and then I take on h4. And that's why he resigned. So this guy miscalculated in the very beginning of the game, and as the result, he ended without a minor piece, but he has two pawns as a compensation. However, he played really well, and there was no chance to initiate a kingside attack, but he was creating a threat, and with all of his moves, well, almost all of his moves, he was trying to attack my pieces, or to get past pawns, or to advance my past pawns, or to capture my pawn to get 3 pieces compensation for the knight. So, and I played very accurately. Well, not very accurately, but accurately enough to defeat him. So, and I was trying to simplify. My only mistake here was to not play g5 in time. So instead of king f7, here I'd better play g5 to stop f4. That would allow my knight to get the control over the e5 square. If only I got it, then the position will be winning with no chances for him. But I missed it and allowed him to play king e4 in this position and to draw the game. But he didn't find it, luckily. So he almost equalized. Okay, fine. So do you have any questions regarding this position? Regarding this game? So if well, I just want to sum it up. If there is no chance for you to initiate a kingside attack, and because of that attack, provoke your opponent to create weaknesses in his camp, or maybe make some more serious mistakes, for example, like it happened in the previous game that Brian played, then you should create small threats, you should keep the position complicated, and you should try to increase the compensation for the piece you lost. So 2 pawns is definitely not enough to compensate the knight, but 2 pawns plus some attacks, plus some pieces activity, plus advancing these pawns may allow white to get a full compensation. Okay, any questions? Okay, so John wanted to say something. No? Okay. Okay, fine. Let's continue. The third game that I prepared for today is the game between Alexander Grishuk and Alexei Shirov. Well, this is where Grishuk sacrificed the piece. He did it. Well, he intended to do this, and he did it. However, it was I would say, kind of inaccuracy. So he played knight g5 in this position, and after this f4, so he wanted to well, he played knight g5 not to attack on f7. He just wanted to push the pawn to f4. If, for example, h6 here, then the knight would go to h3 and the 4 will be played anyway. e5, f4, he takes f4, castle, knight g6, queen h5. Well, I think the idea was to sacrifice on f7 at this moment. So that wasn't the best way. His position is actually a little bit worse. d6 was played. Now well, this pawn was protected by the queen and the knight. So I think actually it wasn't, because after bishop f4, knight f4, you can take on f7. The king moves and you can successfully take that knight. So it wasn't protected. Well, maybe bishop d6 could make sense, but after bishop d6, what do you think? e5 maybe? How would you play here? g3. Well, g3 looks interesting because f7 becomes more important here. Okay, anyway. Actually, bishop d6, g3. Yeah, and after this move, it's knight f7. Takes, king goes away, and this is a strong attack. Well, castle. Not sure about the strong attack, actually. Okay, let's say, what does the engine say here? So g3, f takes g3. The engine suggests rook f7 instead of knight f7. G takes h2, king h1, and bishop f5 to protect everything. So it's a bit unclear. Okay, fine. d6 was played. Bishop f4. So with this move, and with the queen move, white wants to sacrifice on f7. So h6 was played, and finally he decides to sacrifice, which is probably not the best way. And the other move was to just bring the knight back to h3, or I think there was something else. Yeah, knight to h3. And then white could continue attacking the f7 and positionally and playing positionally, but Grishuk decided to sacrifice on f7. Well, if the king takes, it's bishop d6, a discovered attack, of course. So queen takes. Now here's a piece down, but there is a compensation. Who can tell me about the compensation? What exactly here we may say about the compensation? What kind of compensation? Is it about the pawns here? So how many? One pawn is a compensation. Is it enough? Or what else do we have here? So piece activity. Yes, I would say that yes, the queen on h5 and the rook here, the bishop also.
The king is vulnerable.
King is in the trouble. Yeah, the king is in the trouble. That's right. The king is the object of the attack. I would also add that there is a pin. Because the queen won't stay there. After any discovered attack, the queen moves. And actually, there are two pawns to compensate. Because the next move is this, creating a discovered attack. So the queen has to move. Queen goes to e6. And then we should decide how to play. So should we take? Should we move away? Should we take on c5 to get the third pawn? So three factors. First of all, two pawns. Second, this pin. Third, pieces activity. And the fourth is that the king is weak. The weakness of the king in general. So what do you think? How white should continue in this position? Any ideas? Okay, so bishop swaps on f8 and knight c3 for development. Well, yes, but don't you think that it makes sense to capture on c5? If, for example, queen c5, then, well, this move is a blunder because of queen c8 and the rook is hanging. But queen d6 is not a blunder. However, after queen d6, it's rook f8. And what now? If rook takes, the queen is lost. If king e7, I think it's rook f7. So if queen f8, then it's queen c6, king d8, queen takes a8. But the problem is that after queen c5, black overtakes the initiative. King h1 and queen c2 attacking here and threatening with a mate. In this position, there is a bishop for 3 pawns, but white has problems himself. Okay, so queen c5 doesn't make sense. Rook f8 first, after which rook takes f8 and then queen c5, attacking here and here. Doesn't look so good because of knight e7 move. And here the problem is that if you decide to take, queen takes, queen c8, king d8, and after this move, it's simply a checkmate. After the king goes to h1, it's rook f1 mate. So that's why Grishchuk took on f8. Rook takes f8, and in this position, I think John suggested this move. What does the knight do here? Instead, the knight goes to d2, because from there it can go here and take on c5. Maybe it goes here. On c3, the knight doesn't have so many prospects. Bishop d7. Now, well, doesn't make sense to protect, so queen takes c5. Queen e7. What do you think? Should we exchange the queens? Should we move the queen back? Maybe back to h5? Back to the h file, okay. So moving back to the h file, but in such a case, I think they are fine if they, for example, continue with queen g5. Then you need to exchange. Well, maybe it would make more sense. In the game, well, these rooks are exchanged anyway. So that's why here Grishchuk decided to take on f8 first. So the king takes. And now he plays rook f1 check. And after king g8, he finally decided to exchange. Why? With this exchange, the king, which is not on e8 anymore, is too far from the center. So looks like this time we no longer have a kingside attack. There is no pin that we can exploit, but this time we have 3 pawns as a compensation. Well, we still have our pieces active enough. So it's I would say it's a full compensation. The position is equal. What we should do now? We have 3 pawns. So our task is to blockade the enemy pawns, restrict enemy pieces. For example, the knight cannot go there. It's already good. The ideal square for our knight is on c5. If we bring the knight to c5 somehow and support, then we would restrict the bishop too. So knight b3, rook d8, knight c5. Bishop goes to c8. What now? Well, I would play before, I think. Maybe you guys have better suggestions? So for those of us who is watching this webinar on YouTube, I kindly recommend to click on the link and join our Zoom meeting. Because on YouTube, you are watching it with a 20 or 30 seconds delay. So Brian, do you suggest to play h4 with the pawn? What's the point? h3, g4 to restrict the bishop completely. Well, yeah, I think the idea of restricting the bishop is good, but you can achieve two goals simultaneously if you choose another way. Activate your king through h2? What do you mean? Okay, let's say you play this, king g3. Well, it's the endgame, and there are pawns on both flanks, which means that the king should be in the center. And I think that Grishuk actually played a really brilliant move. He just decided to bring the king to f2, then to e3. And when the king is on e3, it looks like the bishop activity here doesn't make much sense. Well, he may go to d1 and attack the pawn, but with c3, it's enough. I mean, that's over. It's over. Black has no counterplay after c3. And this bishop activity on the d1 h5 diagonal no longer makes any sense. So you do not need to play this, which would allow him to play h5 and undermine your pawns. So king f2, rook f8, king e2. Doing this doesn't really make much sense. King e1, they would exchange, and then it's c3. So rook f1 right away, knight g6. Before supporting the position of the knight, king goes to f7, king e2, knight f4, king f3, and knight goes to e6. Looks like a clever idea because, black made a few moves with the knight and finally wants to get rid of the enemy annoying knight on c5. So what would you do? Would you take or would you refuse this exchange? Pawn to c3? What if he takes on c5? It seems okay, but, well, I don't think it seems okay. You double your pawns, and then if he gets his king to e6, then you cannot break through. Well, we should avoid trade. Well, we should avoid trade. Yes, I agree. Why? Because, well, if we take, we simplify. So knight e6, I would say king e6 to get the king closer. And then king e5 or king d6 depends on how white plays. But I don't see a winning plan here. So, for example, what can we do? c4, d4, d5. Okay, they take once. And then no, it doesn't seem like a good idea. So knight b3 was played instead. So the knight is covering these important squares, which makes this knight a bit passive. And then the white's task is to advance the pawns to chase the knight away. And that's it. So king e7, king e3, king d6, d4, king knight c7. So the knight is about to jump here. c4, bishop e6. Ready to d5, to play d5? Maybe, but if you play d5 right away, it seems to me that you won't win the game. Right? So d5, take, fork, and it's equal because they take the pawn on b4. So that's why king d3 first. Bishop g8, a4. Well, pawns, if they're far advanced pawns connected to each other, it will be more difficult for black to stop them. So that's why advancing the pawns, if you do not create any weaknesses in your camp, makes sense. Here, because the king is there, it's always ready to play this move. And for example, knight e6, king c3 to stop the knight's attack. So knight e6. Knight is going here, so we restrict it. knight g5. Now he wants to go there. But once he captures on h2, the knight will be out of the place of action for a while. That's why we can actually let him do this. But first of all, let us improve our knight. So knight d2. This option is no longer possible. So a6 was played in the game, h4, and the knight goes to the edge. I think that was a mistake. So bringing the knight on e6 would allow us to continue the game. Then d5, for example, knight c7, king d4, e5, and so on, e6, d6. Then king enters c5. So this is definitely a much better position for white, but not winning. Knight went to h3. What would you play here? Okay, so no suggestions, guys. So again, restrict the knight, king e3. Yeah, thank you, John. G5. So this is a light squared bishop, so d5. And if he goes there, we can always chase him away. C takes d5, e takes d5, g takes h4, g takes h4. This knight gets more freedom in case if we move the king. So bishop h7, because the bishop is not doing anything here. And here it stops knight e4. It seems that it stops knight e4, but knight e4 is still played. So if they take, the knight is out of the game, and we simply play this and advance our pawns. F2, king d4, and then c5, b5, all pawns together. The knight is too far to stop all these three pawns. So king e5, knight c5 attacking here. Well, doing a5 doesn't make sense. a5, b takes a5, and the king is too far. It cannot go to b7 to stop it. That's why black has to leave the pawn on a6 hanging. But d6. If the king takes, we take here. So knight e6, d7. And this is how the position becomes absolutely winning. Knight d8, knight a6, king goes there, knight goes back. 4 pawns are more than enough to compensate the bishop, especially if they are far advanced. Bishop g8, king d4, knight c6, we go there, and then b5, and finally it's b6. So after they take, it's just b7, because once the knight goes there, we win the game because of this pawn march. We don't even want to take on b8, but we want to push the pawn to a8. So, and this is where black resigned. So here, Grishuk sacrificed a piece for 2 pawns, but together with these 2 pawns, he got so he got an attack on the king, 2 pawns, better pieces coordination, which later he convert to the 3rd pawn because he captured on c5, and he was also able to restrict enemy pieces. He activated the king, bringing the king and play with the king like an ordinary piece, and then started advancing the pawns at the same time restricting enemy pieces. And that was the key to his success that allowed him to win the game. Okay, so we have not much time, but one more game to study. Well, actually 2 more games, but I don't think we have much time for the second game. But before we continue with the next game, which is actually Garry Kasparov's games, let me make a minute of a self-promotion. Okay. So take a look at the screen. So today I would like to present the Chess World Academy. What is it? Well, I think the Chess World Academy is the best option for club players, because you just sign once and you give the access to 108 video courses. And if you, for example, would like to see what is inside, I can show you. And well, if you want to learn the opening, especially if you are under 2000 and spend not more than 3 hours, then you can definitely use this. Academy, there are a lot of openings, as well as other topics are covered. There are even courses by me, and the one that there are two courses I recommend. So one is Win with Evans Gambit. This is, I think, all of my students who play Evans Gambit have. And the other one is Max Lange Attack. Another, well, it's also about e45 positions, a gambit which provides you with a strong attack. So Evans Gambit is really short. You just need 3 hours to learn it. So I kindly recommend you going through this course, as well as maybe Max Lange. Well, of course, there are 2 other courses. I like them too, but I'm not sure if you definitely need to learn how to play Scandinavian. It's actually Scandinavian with knight f6. So we at the Chess World here in the Academy are adding 2 new courses per month. And of course, as a member of this academy, you get, for example, 80% discount on other products of TheChessWorld.com of a regular price. So here we have 3 packages: monthly, monthly, early, and lifetime. So it's just less than $20 per month. And well, at least you can join for a month, then check the courses that you need, and then unsubscribe. I'm going to send you the link here in the chat. So if you want, you may join. I kindly recommend at least for 1 month to try this. Okay, let's now continue with our main topic. So this is the link. And if you want to see what is inside, then this is a link for you. So what I like about the Academy is that the courses are really short. For example, when I make an opening, a course devoted on a certain opening, it's usually a 10 hours course. And I understand that not every of my students need it. Because some are just under 1600, some are about 1200, so they don't need all these complications. So that's why I think that academic courses which last for 3 hours each will suit better for club players, for players from 1200 to 1800, and maybe some of the courses are really good for under 2000 rated players. Okay, so we continue, and our last topic is Garry Kasparov's game. He played the game against Maya Chiburdanidze. While she was I think she was a world champion as well as the champion of USSR. So this is a very old game. Well, we don't need to focus on the opening. Garry was playing with white pieces. It was King's Indian, the most popular variation. Here, people either castle or play d5, but Garry played bishop a3. Queen e7, d5 now. Knight g4 with the idea of doing f5. Bishop g5, of course, to stop it. f6, bishop h4, and f5 no longer works. But h5 works with the idea of g5 and h4. So people mainly continue with knight d2 in this position to prepare for h4, because then the knight is not hanging on g4. But Garry played h3, which is still a good move. Knight goes to h6 and knight d2 this time. c5. So he wants to, well, he may take, but it's not considered to be a good idea because the knight goes to d4. Doing something like f3 is very logical. This is what I would play. I would play f3. Then if g5, I would get my knight to bishop to f2. Then I would continue with g4, trying to open the position, or maybe with h4 and then g4. And then I would castle queenside to initiate an attack on the king side. But Gary plays knight f1, knight f7, and g4. So h takes g4, bishop takes g4. Why with the bishop? The pawns are located on dark squares, so it makes sense to weaken the light squares and exchange the bishop, which is covering them. g5, bishop c8. Well, they cannot take here because of bishop e6, and this bishop on e6 is too strong. Rook takes c8. And this is where Garry Kasparov decides to not play bishop g3, but bishop g3 was definitely possible. Bishop g3, knight h6, knight e3, knight d7, and then doing h4, opening the position, was probably the simplest way to continue the game. But Garry plays knight e3 move, so he leaves the bishop hanging. So Maya Chiburdanidze takes it. And what then? So what do you think? What is the white's compensation here? It wasn't a blunder. It wasn't a miscalculation. It was a sacrifice. And of course, it's not a tactical sacrifice. It's not a tactical combination. Here, white may be better, but it's a long-term sacrifice, and white has to play accurately. But what do you think? Why Garry sacrificed, and what was he hoping for? Please try to, well, okay, so the next move is knight f5. Okay, knight f5, that's right. But what are you hoping here for? Rook g1 to increase the pressure. But knight g5, I'll just block the file. Queen g4 to attack. Queen g4, then to kick. F4 to kick the knight. Well, I doubt f4 is a good idea. I'll show you why. Okay, so well, here queen d8. Okay, for example, queen d8, this is what was played in the game. Queen g4 is definitely good. Knight g5 and f4 doesn't look good. Why? Because they take and then they bring the knight to e5, which makes their position more easy to defend. So, for example, take, well, maybe queen takes. Yeah, the queen takes. Then d6 is vulnerable, but I still think that they can capture, or they can play knight d7. And after this move, it's knight e5, threatening with a fork. The knight is hanging too. So that's why d6 is a poison pawn. Even if you take it with your queen, I think it's still not a good idea. Why? Knight e5. And if you play knight e7, it's king f8. No, king h8. King h8. So, knight c8. Queen c8. And knight c4 is coming, so this is a problem. There are two minor pieces for a rook, but looks like black no longer needs to defend their king. So f4 allows black to occupy the e5 square. Okay, so knight h4 was played. Rook c7, knight f5, a6, h4. Knight goes to h7. Rook g1, they increase the pressure. Queen f8. Now king e2. So the king is safe on the king side. knight g5 doesn't work. So the white's task is just to double the rooks on the g file, which he successfully did. Rook a b7, and now he sees that there is just a straightforward attack and nothing can be done to stop it. He prepares, he moves his king to the safe place, and then he finally decides to not play h5, but plays f4. So the point is that knight d7 doesn't work because of rook g7. That's why f4 here works. b5, a takes b5, a takes b5, and then h5. h6 is a threat because then rook g8 is coming. So h6 is still possible. It was one of the best ideas, but Gary plays queen h3. h6 is a threat, h takes g7, queen h8, the game will be over. So here Maya Cheburdanidze makes a mistake, she takes, and the king is, well, I think queen h7 was a better move, but g takes f7 is enough to win. So if the king takes, it's rook g7. If the king goes there, it's still rook takes g7. And the game is over, it's extra rook. And white wins here. So when here he decided to sacrifice this bishop on h4, he had in mind that with knight f5, queen g4 activity, he at least captures on h4, and black has to defend this bishop. He has no counterplay. But even if they are able to defend their bishop, it's still a pawn march, which allows us to add more pressure and to take advantage of this attack on the g file. So that was the reason why Garry Kasparov decided to sacrifice the bishop, and that was the reason why he succeeded. Okay, so that's all for today. What I want you to remember is just, guys, if you are down the material, do not exchange minor or major pieces. Try to complicate the game and, if possible, initiate the attack on the enemy king. If it's not possible, then, well, try to attack and keep the initiative. By making a series of threats, you provoke your opponent to defend, and maybe he won't play accurately and makes a mistake. Even that happens in my game that I illustrated today. My opponent was able to draw the game. If it's the end game, try to restrict enemy pieces with your pawns and advance your pawns to make them more valuable, and maybe tie enemy pieces down to that pawns. Okay, so we are done for today. Any questions? So next Sunday, use the same link. I will also send an announcement with the topic of a new webinar, but you can use the same link to join it. Okay, if no questions, let's finish for today, and see everyone next Sunday. So if you have any questions regarding the Chess World Academy, you can always message me on tricksofchess@gmail.com. And see everyone next Sunday.